Nelson Agustin woke to the sound of something hitting metal. He had been asleep only a few hours, curled between his cousins on the crowded deck of the MV Doña Paz, when the noise snapped through the quiet like a warning. At 13, he had grown used to the cramped conditions of travel. People were sleeping shoulder to shoulder, their bags stacked against walls, children resting across laps. The ferry carried far more passengers than the manifest listed, and every open space had been claimed long before nightfall. But this sound felt wrong. It was sharp, echoing through the ship with a heaviness that made his stomach tighten. He pushed himself up, expecting to see someone dropping luggage or stumbling in the dark. Instead, he caught the faint smell of gasoline drifting across the air. Passengers around him stirred, confused, some rubbing their eyes while others sat upright, trying to understand why the heat felt like it had jumped several degrees in seconds. Nelson stood and moved toward the railing, weaving through the clusters of blankets and bags. When he reached the edge of the deck, he froze. A burning ship was coming toward them. The MT Vector, a tanker carrying thousands of barrels of gasoline, was less than a minute away, already engulfed in flames that towered above its deck. The orange glow lit the water like a moving line of fire. People around Nelson stared silently at first, their disbelief holding them still. Then panic exploded across the deck. Passengers shouted for the bridge to turn, to reverse, to do anything to avoid the collision. But the distance closed too quickly. The Doña Paz continued forward, no alarms sounding, no crew members issuing instructions. Nelson gripped the railing as the Vector slammed into the ferry with a force that knocked him sideways. The impact threw people to the floor and sent luggage skidding. Before he could catch his balance, an eruption of fire followed, the gasoline igniting instantly and spreading across the water like a living wall of heat. Flames raced along the slick, climbed the side of the ferry, and burst through windows. The heat struck Nelson like a physical blow. He covered his face with his arm, felt the sting of burning air against his skin, and struggled to breathe through the thick smoke rolling over the deck. People ran in every direction, some screaming, others silent with shock. Mothers grabbed their children. Men tried to break open access doors. The metal beneath Nelson's feet grew hotter with every passing second. He searched for his cousins, but saw only bodies moving in a frenzy, lit by the reflection of fire spreading across the water. Passengers pushed toward any open space they thought might offer escape. Many climbed onto the railing. Some jumped before the flames reached them. Nelson backed away from the worst of the heat, coughing as smoke clawed at his throat. He heard someone nearby shouting that the ship was burning from below, that the cabins were already filling with fire. He glanced over the railing. The sea churned violently, streaked with burning fuel. There was no clear patch of water untouched by flame. His mind spun with the impossible choice: stay on the ferry and face the fire, or jump and risk landing in a sea of burning gasoline. A loud crack tore through the air. Another explosion shook the deck. Without letting himself think further, Nelson climbed onto the railing, pushed off with both feet, and jumped. The cold hit him so hard that he couldn't breathe. The shock locked his chest tight, sending a burst of pain through his ribs as he plunged deeper into the dark water. His arms clawed upward on instinct, each movement heavy and uncoordinated. When he broke the surface, he gasped, dragging in smoky air that tasted like chemicals. Flames drifted around him in long lines. Burning debris floated close enough that he had to push it away with both hands. He kicked hard, trying to distance himself from the ferry, but the water felt thick with fuel. His clothes dragged him down. Behind him, the Doña Paz was fully engulfed, the flames rising so high they seemed to swallow the sky. Explosions burst one after another, voices echoed across the waves, cries for help, desperate splashing, panicked pleas that grew fainter as minutes stretched on. Nelson saw a man struggling a few yards away, his arms slapping the water in uneven strokes. Nelson tried to swim toward him, but the flames shifted with the wind, forcing him to turn away to avoid being trapped. The screams around him faded one at a time. The water cooled, but the cold worked against him now, numbing his legs and making each breath more painful. A floating piece of wreckage drifted past, still warm but intact. Nelson lunged for it, gripping the edge with trembling fingers and pulling himself halfway onto it. The wood bobbed under his weight, but held. He clung to it with every bit of strength he had left. His breaths came quick and shallow, lungs burning from the smoke he'd inhaled before the jump. Each wave slapped against his body, threatening to tear him loose. Time stretched into something unrecognizable. He didn't know if he drifted for minutes or hours. All he saw was darkness, punctuated by flickers of fire still burning on the waves behind him. At some point, he realized the cries around him had stopped completely. The sea had grown quiet except for the distant crackle of flames and the low hum of the wind. Then he saw a light. It was small at first, just a narrow beam cutting through the darkness. Nelson raised one arm, waving it weakly. The pain in his muscles screamed, but he kept waving. The light paused, then turned directly toward him. A tanker diverted course, its crew shouting instructions as they lowered a small rescue boat. He tried to answer, but his voice barely carried. When a rescuer finally grabbed him under the arms and lifted him aboard, Nelson collapsed against the deck, shivering violently. Smoke clung to his hair and skin. His eyes burned, but he was alive. Later, aboard the larger ship, he learned the scope of what had happened. The Doña Paz had carried more than 4,000 people, families traveling home, workers heading to Manila, students returning from holidays. Fewer than 30 survived. The fire had been so intense that many bodies were never recovered. Investigators uncovered a chain of failures: missing officers, overloaded decks, faulty radios, and a collision course that should never have occurred. But none of it changed the simple truth he couldn't escape. Almost everyone he had been traveling with was gone. Nelson's survival became one of the rare stories pulled from a disaster that claimed more lives than any peacetime maritime accident in modern history. He lived because he ran when instinct told him to, because he jumped before the flames reached him, and because he held on to debris long after his strength should have failed. He never forgot the fire, the darkness, or the silence that followed. And he never forgot the people who didn't make it out of the water. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.